I am exceedingly pleased to be here with you today. Wherever you're listening to this, this is going to be a really exceptional episode. We're going to talk about things that really, really need to be talked about here. So, you know my view, right? Tough times are here, and perhaps they're visiting you in your life a lot right now, perhaps a little, maybe not at all. I don't know. But maybe the best answer is maybe not yet, but tough times are here. And at Peak Prosperity, our view is that how you fare through these times really depends on these three things. First, what's your education, your context? What do you know? Second, the people in your lifeboat with you. And then finally, the actions you take or maybe don't take. These all define how our situation turns out. Today's conversation with the extraordinarily talented, always thought-provoking author, philosopher, performer, deep thinker, wordsmith, and farmer poet extraordinaire, Stephen Jenkinson. We're going to explore the ways in which the very fabric of our culture is being shredded to the point that preceding generations no longer share much in common in the way of customs and beliefs at times. So, change, I know. Change is always a part of the human condition, but never more so than in times like these when huge veering course corrections are underway. Now, will these turns of the steering wheel lead to calmer waters, or are they taking us towards the rocks? Will this be a good thing or a bad thing? We don't know. It's our interpretation. So this is the third interview between myself and Stephen Jenkinson. And this time, we're going to be diving into money and explore the strange idea of how we make sense of what's happening around us in these times. Stephen Jenkinson's website is orphanwisdom.com. His most recent book is Reckoning, co-written with Kimberly Ann Johnson and described as an unguarded, sober meeting with spirit work, elderhood, grief, and plague, and building culture in a me-first era. He's been in many films. His current musical poetic tour, Nights of Grief and Mystery, is extraordinarily powerful. I've been to it twice. It should not be missed. See it if you can. But the book today that I want to explore in more depth is Money and the Soul's Desire, which made a lasting impression on me and I think is especially worth revisiting today. Stephen, welcome back to the program.
That was magnificent. Are you available for hire or just on an introduction basis?
Yes, I give these away for free when people win the NPR contest.
I see. This is a kind of lost leader for me, right? I get the first one free?
Yeah, correct. Use it however many times as you like. Make it a ringtone. It'll be great.
Okay. You oriented us as to retail now.
I do what I can. Just trying out. But thank you for that. Thank you for that. So here's where I want to start with this today. Okay, Stephen, I can tell you all about money. I can tell you what it does, its features, its history. I can tell you a lot of things, but the thing I can't account for is how money has a power that can cause some people, or maybe all of us, to lose the thing that is most important to us, which would be our soul's journey, our integrity. I don't know what it is, but I grapple all the time and I haven't got an answer, and maybe no answers are here today, but I want to explore what is money and how does it have the impact on us that it does.
Okay, that's where you want to start.
Yeah.
Okay. The easy stuff first. Well, let me throw something at the wall, and maybe this is between your introduction and this, maybe we can begin here somewhere. So first of all, I'd imagine out loud with you, the distinct possibility is there's a bit of a formulation problem in the question. That is, that it accepts without wonder, so I heard it at least, that money has this power. And it's much more often than not the power of undoing, the power of dislocation, the power of rupture, disassembly, disarray, all of that iteration. I don't think you would have gone on to say it has other kinds of power too. I'm really wondering whether it has this power at all. So let me set the stage for that kind of proposition. So I'm in you may have heard the story. I can't remember if we've spoken about it. True story though, really happened. Subsequent to the publication of the book, Money and the Soul's Desires, I was on a bit of a publicity jaunt, not much of one because the publisher literally went bankrupt just as the book emerged. So So there was some poetic injustice there. But in the time that they were still solvent, I was on a live television talk show panel discussion. I don't remember if the subject was explicitly about money, but probably that accounts for my presence on the scene. On to my left was a clergy person, which I thought was a bit redundant, but okay, I can let it pass. On the other side, though, was a man who was the scion of an exceedingly rich family, which is to say, I think he was third in line. And as you probably know, in really exceedingly rich families, you don't want to be third in line because you're going to get basically the custodial work available to you, and the high-end opportunities are going to pass you by unless you show exceeding promise early on. So I don't know if this man showed that promise or not, but in any event, his job at that point in his life, which he clearly found ignoble, was to administer and adjudicate over the family's trust, the charitable trust that they'd established to disseminate some portion of their gains to the general good. So anyway, we're going along, and then as a kind of bone tossing in my direction, he said, and as you know, money is the root of all evil. And then he went on, and I thought to myself, let's revisit that. So when he took a breath, I said, actually, that's not what the quote says. I know that's the one that people turn to, especially in a moment like this. But the quote actually is a little more clarifying than that. It says, "For I tell you, brethren, it is the love of money which is the root of all evil." And then I let that hang for a minute in the air because it's clearly a kind of course correction. It sounds subtle at the beginning, but if you let it in, it really relocates this question of money's power. And here's the other half. After a moment, I said to him, but let's leave that for the theologians, and let's admit that there's certainly an acknowledgement in the biblical phrase that money has this octane to it, which is exceedingly hard to manage and seems to defeat the best of us much more often than it doesn't. If that's true, and you clearly align yourself with that understanding, then what are you doing giving it away? And the poor man, who clearly had never thought that thought before, kind of flatlined right in front of me. And it was not the most noble moment in my public life, but it seemed it belonged there. So I begin our talk today, you and me, with the consideration that the Bible gets it right from time to time. I think we could all agree. And in this particular case, it's locating the volatility of money, not in the nature of money, but in the nature of our relationship to it. Which is to say, money is probably best understood as the same way that the Ark of the Covenant was misunderstood or understood back in the day, that they say it was empty. Not missing anything, but empty nonetheless. I suspect that's the fundamental nature of money, is its emptiness, its capacity to take things on in much in the fashion that water is empty in and of itself. It has certain physical properties, but most of them are vulnerable or consequential to what the containers and the voyages that are undertaken upon it and so on. And as to giving the money away, it being such a troubling thing, I can only guess that the notion there is initially it's not troubling, and long-term you're on your own when it comes to be on the receiving end of some kind of charity or financial grace.
So this relationship to money, this is I want to explore this because I have this operative theory about myself as a human, which is that I'm not terribly complicated, in the sense that if you take something that's one step removed, it seems to absolve me of things, right? I'll put this in the personal, but this is an observation I've seen. And money is an abstraction. It's just an abstraction. It's neither good nor bad, but thinking makes it so, right? As we say in Macbeth, right? But that abstraction seems sufficient. So here's a story of self. Stephen, I do not support child labor or slavery, but I own an iPhone. What's the difference? Isn't it's just that one step removed? I didn't do it. Are we not complicated enough to follow the consequences from beginning to end? And is that all it takes, that one abstraction?
Well, it would appear to be so, yes. If you're rescued from the first point of contact with the troubling thing, the powers of mitigation are there to be had immediately, because we seem to locate malfeasance in intention and not in action. So if your intention is grief-free, then your consequences are likely to be grief-free as well. And they're at least up for grabs and far from predetermined. Yeah. So it's grievous, is it not, to observe ourselves in the act of the fancy footwork of one step removed. And a global economy and globalization in general thrives on the one step removedness, it seems to me. That as long as you seem to be participating actively in the global economy, and as long as you appear to be giving back just by virtue of being a consumer, and as long as you can challenge, with a kind of grim throwdown, say, okay, then let's me and everybody I know and 400 people that each one of them know, let's throw our cell phones in the toilet. Let's see how the people in chat are doing now. I mean, that would be the obvious defense against the status quo, right? So all of these things are predicated on a dilemma that there's a principal transgression and then there's corollary consequences. But it's not clear in a global economy, like I'm talking out of my hat. I'm not an economist by any stretch, but it seems to me that one of the consequences of a global economy is a kind of, do they call it vertical integration? I think that's the title, the name. The consequence of the integration is a mess of cause and effect. Is it impossible to intuit original cause and go to the original cause and correct at source, the idea being that downstream all the corrections will materialize. And it's clear that the operators of the system long ago anticipated the possibility of certain ne'er-do-wells, perhaps like yourself, asking these very, how should I call them, inefficient questions about the machinery. And they're way ahead of us in terms of that integration. They're way ahead of us in terms of whatever populist solution we could generate to the dilemmas that you've so, achingly and correctly itemized. So yeah, sadly, between that and the fleeting powers of focus and attention span that contemporary people seem to have, yes, I think you're sadly on the mark more than you wish you were.
So the idea that's gelling for me then is that if we're not a lot more complicated than one step removed without maybe a lot of effort, money's an abstraction in the first place unless it's very direct. You have a sheep, I have maple syrup, we conduct a transaction, very concrete. Then gold and silver came along, but still concrete, because you could look at that piece of metal and know how much human effort was required to wrest that from the ground, which did not give it up easily. That's why it was money, in part. Today, money is printed out of thin air and distributed rather unfairly. So one of the abstractions of money to me is a social contract. It's an agreement. We just agree. We agree that this piece of paper, when we're using physical cash, has meaning. But now you don't even have that. You just tap your card at the machine and somehow things happen. So we now have abstractions on top of abstractions. So what's can this be this feels to me like a contributory cause of that? Like, it's not one step removed. I don't even know what the steps are anymore.
Yeah. I'd suggest the word disembodied might be a better word than abstracted. Disembodied brings it closer to the hand, but no closer. Simply closer to the hand as something you can imagine. But at the end of the day, you count very little, right? Even the counting is done for you, and not just at year's end, but ongoingly. The keeping track is done for you. Your only job is to authorize the expenditure, period, basically. In other words, we are quintessential consumers. And this is true in the realm of ideas as much as it's true in the realm of toilet paper. And if it seemed, and as one who's participated in the folly of teaching at once upon a time, I can report faithfully to you the following. If you engage a consumer culture at the level of a teaching capacity, and you second guess the advisability of selling people something, you will not be forgiven. Isn't that the oddest combination of things? That a consumer culture is Pavlovian, you see. And you have to be on the sell to be credible. But if I say that, just about anybody would object in principle of base integrity. They would object in principle. I don't want to be sold. I want to be informed. I want to be included. But can you tell the difference between being included and being pitched? And even at the level of what's good for your soul, you'd be hard pressed to find the difference between those two things, being on the receiving end of the come on.
I heard you tell a powerful story once about eating the teacher.
Yes. Yeah.
And I wonder if you could bring that in, because I want to bring people into this part of the conversation, because we live in that consumer culture.
Indeed.
And that spoke to me greatly. So
yeah, this really happened. And I was there. So that's the authority I bring to bear on the subject. So I was invited. I'll give you the kind of medium range version of the thing. I was invited to participate in something that they called the Toronto Prayer Festival, which was immediately compelling. I couldn't even picture what it was, but the fact that somebody put those words together was reason enough for me to say, okay, how does this work? And I did. And they said, we're inviting all the heavy hitters from all the world's religions to come and practice their fundamental devotions in front of a paid audience. Wow, I said, so who have you got? And they said, Swami so-and-so, Reverend so-and-so, Rabbi, and they went down the list of the usual suspects, as you'd expect. And then a question was aching at the end of this list. Who am I compared to all these guys? And I asked him, well, who? And it became clear immediately that he'd never thought the thought before. So he was thinking about it and scrambling right in front of me. And I said, who are my guys then? And he said, all the rest. So then I was the nominated clergy person for the great non-aligned. That's who I was. So I agreed to come, and I appeared, and they brought me into the VIP room, which is strange for a prayer festival to have a VIP room, just in principle. But before there's prayer, there's the hustle and the notoriety and that whole thing that draws the people in the first place. So of course there's a VIP room, and in we went, and I was about the last to be sat. So people were already there and they're engaged in conversation. I'm really no good at small talk. I've never been good at small talk. And it was achingly obvious as soon as I sat down that I could, and I was intimidated, I should say, because these guys look good. They had all their cool guy stuff on. I had nothing to compare. And they sat me beside the guy who I could tell, even being me, he was a Tibetan Rinpoche with the orange outfit and the hard, vaccination tattoo and the whole thing. So I didn't know what to say to him. I didn't know if he spoke English. There's only one way to find out. And I said to him, what do you think about the food? And he said that he didn't like it very much, which I was stunned to be educated on the matter of that Tibetans don't like stuff. Isn't that lame? But I was surprised. And I said, really? I said, I miss the meat. And he said, I do too. What? You miss meat? This can't be possible. And I'm secretly beginning to think, I think I'm sitting beside the guy I'm supposed to sit beside. He's the mythical brother that you never knew you had. So he said, yeah, at home, if you don't eat meat in the wintertime, you die. So that's our thing. Anyway, we conversed back and forth very briefly. And then he stopped and he put everything down. And he turned and he faced me. And he said, why do you teach? No preamble. An absolutely direct question. And he was not making conversation. I could tell by his voice and his look that this was a burning question of a sort. And I wasn't sure what the answer was. And so I paused for a moment. I played for time. And I asked him why he asked. And he said, with a brief hesitation and with a mournfulness in his voice that I would never expected to hear from somebody in the cloth, he said, "Here they eat teachers." And he just stopped the atoms in the room. I don't say that anybody else overheard, because I don't think they did. But for me, everything stopped. The utter, unvarnished, unvanquished truth of that observation bordered on the impossible to bear, especially given what we were about to go out and do. You see, here they eat teachers, he said. And then there's a pause, and then he asked me again, because he wasn't going to answer his own question, you see. And I said, it's all I could come up with on short notice. I said, that's why. Them eating teachers is why you teach? Yes. Hypothetically and naively, I am trying to do something about the meat-eating variety of those who are drawn to, you know, people who imagine other possibilities because they've seen them at some level. It was a staggering moment, certainly for me, and I have it on good notice that he disappeared thereafter, and nobody in those environs in the Toronto area ever saw him again. So the PS on the back end of the story would be something like this. You know, Tibetan monks, they get a lot of high-end training. That's my best guess on the subject. And esoteric training that goes back a good long way and is tested and ratified, it seems to me, by life in the trenches, especially the last 60 or 70 years. And so he didn't talk about the Chinese one time, though. He talked about us. He talked about basically, let's call it Anglo-North America. And he said, parenthetically, he said, you know, my training enabled me to contend with the Chinese and their genocide, but nothing that we studied, nothing that we know readied us for the likes of your attempt to love what we're trying to do. Wow.
This from a man who presumably under certain circumstances would light himself on fire, would gladly give of his whole self for multi-thousand-year traditions. His belief structure was that he comes from that culture, and he comes over here and is basically consumed.
And not rescued by his understanding. His heart is not above the fray. This is an extraordinary combination of real integration, you know, but calamitous, I should say, integration. Not one you'd necessarily wish upon someone, but there it is. He did his best. He came here, I don't really know why, but at some level to practice amongst people who would be ostensibly friendly to the occasion and friendly to the offering. And he discovered, to his clear regret and heartbreak, that it simply wasn't true. It was probably happenstantially true, but over and above the exceptions, the rule seemed to be that he was himself on offer.